Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Aaron. Welcome to the den. So the topic that I got, or at least the question I got asked, was about slavery being in the Bible and why would a powerful, peaceful, loving God allow slavery to exist in our physical world as well as it being mentioned in the Bible. It was a great question. It's a question that I wouldn't say I asked myself because I used to be an atheist. But it's definitely like a thing that I would use against people who believed in Jesus or God. Like, common ones, right? Like, oh, a God can exist, right? Because there's such evil in the world. There's poverty. There's, people starving, that kind of thing, right? So it's definitely a common thing I've been asked. So I thought it was a great thing to touch on. And so without further ado, that's what we're going to discuss today. Why would an all-powerful, loving, peaceful God condone or allow slavery? So let's get into it. Great, welcome back. So there is 4 points that I want to get into that'll all kind of culminate into the 5th point. And so we're going to be looking at Deuteronomy. I think I said that word wrong, but you get the point. We're going to get into that very, very deeply. I apologize if you guys can hear my dog in the back. She's gnarling on some type of chew toy that she's got in there. But I want to get into 4 points, like I said, that are going to kind of culminate into the 5th point, which is where we'll end there. So why would God allow slavery? Because again, he is an all-powerful God. He is the creator of the universe. He exists outside of the earth. And he reigns in heaven, right? And so, yes, he is an all-powerful God, and yes, there is some crazy things that take place in the Bible, and so that's what we're going to dive deep into today. So without further ado, let me get straight into it. I have my notes here on my laptop, so you'll see me looking away quite a bit. This is something that the Holy Spirit revealed to me, and so for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with the Holy Spirit has a way of what you'll often hear phrased as downloading. And so when he downloads something into your spirit, for those of you guys, I don't know, I was a big Transformers fan when I was younger. And so there's a scene where Sam Witwicky is like some creature or something like went up his nose and it's causing him to write something like all this crazy things on this board where he starts going crazy, right? And you can kind of see like he's like eyes are flickering and everything because he's just being hit with so much information as he's writing on this board. It's a very dramatic scene, but that's essentially how it feels. It literally kind of like you're just kind of flooded, at least for me, the way God speaks to me. He's more visual with me. And so I'll literally be flooded with images, and then I'll hear scriptures, or I'll see the scriptures in my mind's eye with the vision playing in my head as like a memory would. And then I don't audibly hear it, but like within my spirit, it'd be like, this is why that thing happened, or this is what I meant when I said this, and remember that memory. And it it's like he's using my mind's eye, my brain's memory function, if that makes sense, and then as well as my inner spirit to kind of put all these things together into perspective. And so I say all that because you'll see me referencing my laptop, my notes, so that way I can organize this message in a way that makes sense, so I'm not kind of like squirrel braining and just kind of word vomiting some stuff out to you guys. So like I said, there'll be 4 main points ending into our 5th concluding point. And like I said, we're going to be mainly operating out of Deuteronomy. So my first point is that God actually lays out instructions on how to treat slaves. And so you'll see that slavery is often, in the olden days, right, it was whenever someone conquered a new land, the people there often would become the servants of that land. And so they would do things like stand watch, they would help build things, they would help like go out and gather water and things like that, right? And so those were essentially the slaves, right? And so just kind of keep that in mind as we're working through Deuteronomy. Okay, so the first scripture I have is Deuteronomy 16:14. And so that's chapter 16, verse 14. Give me some time to flip. Here we are. So we're in 16:14. Yes, I'm old school. I got my Bible here. So the scripture says, "And you shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, and the Levite, the stranger and the fatherless, and the widow, who are within your gates." So again, it says, "And you shall rejoice," meaning you should celebrate, you should feast. You and your son, your daughter, so your family should rejoice with you. Your male servants and your female servants should be rejoicing with you. Your Levites, which were another tribe of Israel, they were like the priests. The stranger, so foreigners, people you don't know, the fatherless, and the widow. The widows were almost kind of treated not like outcasts, but kind of like outsiders. And so you'll often hear in the Bible where God tells you to kind of like take them under the wing and that kind of thing. So he says to rejoice with these people who are within your gates, right? And so right there already, first point, we see that you're called to celebrate with your slaves, right? You're called to rejoice with them. So even people that you don't know, it says the foreigner that's within your gates. So we're all called to rejoice with one another. So just a quick highlight that, if God doesn't view slaves the way it's portrayed and seen on this earth, right? With such harshness, rudeness, treating them inhumanely, right? You're already seeing that that's not the way he views them. I also want to go to Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 12. And it reads, I read out of the New King James Version, by the way. So it reads, "And you shall rejoice," again, there's that word rejoice, "and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levite who is within your gates, since he has no portion nor inheritance with you." So again, we see him foot stomping. So he foot stomps us first in chapter 12, and then he's foot stomping again in chapter 16, right? And so again, servants, slaves, however you want to call them, we're inviting to, they're almost like mandated, right? To include them in your worship gatherings, include them in your rejoicement when you're rejoicing with God. Let's take a look at chapter 24. 24, verse 14 and 15. Chapter 24, verses, this is 28. We're going to be in chapter 24, verses 14 and 15. Alrighty. It says, "You shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy, whether one of your brethren or one of the aliens who is in your land within your gates. Each day you shall give him his wages, and not let the sun go down on it." So don't pay him late, pay him on time. "For he is poor and has set his heart on it." So he's counting on this money. He's poor, therefore you should pay him what you pay him. Don't let the sun go down before you pay him. "Lest he cry out against you to the Lord, and it be sin to you." So these are some key things that I kind of want to foot stomp and highlight here. Number one being, you shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and needy. Oppress, obviously, oppression means to put down, to treat bad, to be unkind to, right? So again, the inhumane pictures of slavery, right? Obviously, with me being African American, right? So it makes sense that I would bring this up as an example, right? So you often hear about how slavery. We would hear about people being raped, people being some people were like burned alive, whipped, obviously, right? Beaten, spit on, had dogs thrown onto them, right? Children being like stripped naked and beaten and strung up on poles and stuff like that to be humiliated, stuff like all sorts of craziness, right? That first verse, "You shall not oppress a hired servant who is poor and who is needy, whether he's one of your brethren," meaning he's like part of the children of Israel, so whether he's the same tribe, whatever, same citizen, whatever, or one of the aliens who is in your land, meaning he's foreign but he lives here, right? "You shall not oppress them." So if we're following God's example already, and again, this is actually God speaking, right? He's giving these laws to Moses, and Moses is relating these laws to the people of Israel. So again, if we're following God's mandate of not oppressing a servant, then the way the slavery that we've seen in America would not be so. So again, the slavery that you see in America is disobedience. It's us not listening to how God told us to treat people, to treat one another. Okay? So again, just keep that in mind. You shall not oppress the hired servant who is needy and who is poor, whether he's your brethren or whether he's an alien whose land is within your gates. It says 15, each day you shall give him his wages, so every day you should be paying him. Obviously, that was not the case that we've seen with slavery in America or just in the world, period, right? They were working without pay, and if they were being paid, it was very, very little, right? It says, each day you shall give him his wages, and do not let the sun go down on it. Meaning, do not be lazy. Do not be like, oh, okay, well, it doesn't matter. They got to come work tomorrow anyway. So, they'll come to work. We'll figure out this whole pay thing later on. But just go ahead and go work. We'll figure it out when we get to it, right? God says don't do that. Pay him his wages and don't let the sun go down on it. And it says, for he is poor and has set his heart on it. So obviously he is poor. Money makes the world go round. We know that he needs money, right? People can't survive without money. And so it's saying that his heart is set on it. He is counting on it. He's counting on you paying him right and on time. So don't delay. It says, lest he cry out against you to the Lord. So if you do pay him late, you don't pay him correctly and on time, it says that he will cry out against the Lord and that sin will be added onto you. So that sin, which Jesus died on the cross for, because sin condemns, it sends us to hell. You could go to hell if you do not pay men what they're owed and on time. Because he's going to cry out to the Lord, and that sin will be added onto you. That blood will be on your hands. That's how God views this. So that alone, honestly, I feel like should kill this whole debate. But we're going to continue. So the points that I'm kind of hitting on again is that so far we've seen that God says that you are to include your servants along with your family and loved ones and things like that. When you're rejoicing with the Lord, they should be included. Now we've just read where it says that you shouldn't oppress them, right? You should pay them on time, and you should not let the sun go down on that, right? So again, you should pay them on time, you should pay them what they're owed, and if you don't do these things when he cries out to God, that sin will be added onto you. All right, so again, here what I'm trying to foot stop and emphasize is, I apologize, my dog's crying. She doesn't like being put up in the crate. She's still a puppy. So what I'm emphasizing with these three scriptures is that slaves are protected with kindness. They're protected with inclusion, right? Bring them in when you rejoice. Kindness, pay them. Do not treat them with oppression, right? But they're also to be treated with dignity and not exploitation, right? Do not let the sun go down. So we're called to pay them on time, pay them what they're owed, and do not oppress them. And instead, bring them in, include them in when you rejoice before the Lord. Failure to do these things will be their sin. The sin of not doing these things will be added onto you. So keep that in mind. Now, point 2 I want to make is God actually mandates a release of slaves. And so we're going to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 15. I don't know why I closed my Bible. I know I'm going to need it. Deuteronomy chapter 15. There we go. Chapter 15, verses 12 through 18. And basically we're going to read about how after 6 years, God mandates that you release the slave and that you don't send them away empty-handed. That's a key thing that I want to foot stop. So we're going to be doing 12 through 18. Here we go. If your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you and serves you 6 years, then in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you send him away free from you, you shall not let him go away empty-handed. So he's going to serve you for 6 years. He'll be your slave for 6 years. And then you're going to release him, completely a freed man, in that 7th year. But you're not going to let him go empty-handed. This is what you're going to do. Verse 13. When you send him away free from you, you shall not let him go away empty-handed. Verse 14. You shall supply him freely from your flock, from your threshing floor, and from your winepress. Meaning you should give him some of the materials that you have stored up. Flock, give him some of your animals. Winepress, give him something to drink, right? Give him some of the food that you have stocked up. And it says, from what the Lord your God has blessed you with, you shall give to him. Can you imagine? I just want to kind of stop right there, right? Can you imagine how slavery would have been pictured in our world, right? How slavery would have been like if that was the case? How slavery probably would have lasted, how short it would have been if that was the case. If we were like, hey, you're going to work for me for 6 years, there's some things I'm trying to get built and done. But on the 7th year, I'm going to let you go. And what God has blessed me with, my land, my money, my provision, right? My food, supplies, I'm going to send you with a portion, right? When you're on your way. Imagine already how much more groundbreaking and that would have been had we done that, right? But humanity, we don't listen to God. We like to do our own thing. So it says, from what the Lord your God has blessed you with, you shall give to him. You shall remember, this is when he's talking to the Israelites, he's saying, you shall remember that you too were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you, meaning he bought you, he removed you from, right? So in the book of Exodus, you'll read about how the children of Israel, from Moses being their prophetic leader, he basically commands the Egyptian king known as Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, right? So they leave Egypt and then they're going to go into the promised land. At least that was the idea. However, there was some struggle along the way. So you'll read about that in the book of Exodus. But basically what God is saying here is that when you've hired this person for 6 years to work for you and you release them on the 7th year, you're going to give them a portion of what God has blessed you with, because God is basically symbolically saying that the same way that I brought you out of Egypt, when you were a slave to the Egyptians, and I gave you my blessing because on that journey I supplied you with manna so you weren't hungry. I supplied you with guidance, right? It talked in the book of Exodus, it says that they were at night they were guided by fire, and then during the day they were guided by clouds, right? And so God literally provided them. Even when they came across the obstacles, right? You'll read that they parted the Red Sea, right? The story of Moses and the Red Sea parting, that was in there. Moses striking the stone and water coming out, that's in there, right? So basically God is symbolically saying the same way that you were slaves in a foreign land is how, and I treated you with kindness, that's what you're called to do here. So when you release these slaves, you're going to give them a portion of your blessing, and remember that what I did for you, you're now called to do for them. That alone, again, imagine how much more this world, how much hate would be absolved if that's how we treated our slaves. If that's how we treated our servants, how much hate, how much less hate there would be in the world, right? Again, it says, the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore, I command you this thing today. I command you this thing today. This is what God is saying. I command you. This is a commandment. It's how you should be treating people. So a lot of people like to talk about, right? Like when we talk about the 10 commandments, this is also another commandment. I command you this thing today, God is saying. And if it happens that he says to you, verse 16, and if it happens that he says to you, I will not go away from you because he loves you and your house, since he prospers with you, then it basically says like you should like take something and kind of like pierce it through his ear, and basically he'll be your servant forever, right? So it basically ends with him saying that like if you want to release the slaves, right? They did their 6 years, they did their time with you, and you're like, okay, cool, go be free. And they're like, well, no, I want to stay with you. Like it was fun. Like I'm prospering over here with you. Like we're knocking things out. I want to stay with you. Then God gives them instructions on how to make him your servant forever, right? So again, the whole point of point 2, right, is the release of slaves. So the whole thing that I'm emphasizing here with that chapter, chapter 15, verses 12 through 18, is that after 6 years, you were supposed to free your slaves. And when you did that, you wouldn't send them away empty-handed. You're essentially giving them means to have a new start. And it's because that's the point that I want to hit on, is that this shows that God builds freedom and restoration into his law. That's the whole overarching point, is God is a God of a person where naturally, just because it's who he is, he naturally wants to see people be released from bondage and brought into freedom and restoration and healing and provision, right? In an overarching sense, that's essentially the Christian faith, right? We're being oppressed by the enemy, and I want to pull you out of that bondage. But as humanity, because we have free will, we kept getting caught in that bondage. And so then God sends down his only son, Jesus Christ, who is now able to conquer death. He conquered sin. And because of that, now we can walk in freedom with Jesus Christ and God the Father with the end goal being that we would be able to be with him in heaven. So the overarching Christian faith is tied to this right here. Remember how you were a slave in a foreign land and I redeemed you. I bought you, right? Jesus Christ redeemed us and he bought us, right? I bought you from a place of bondage and brought you into the promised land with Moses and the Israelites. Now Jesus is buying us, removing us from bondage, right? And now he's bringing us to the promised land, with this promised land being heaven, right? So you see the symbolism there, right? You see the parallels there, right? So that's the point of number 2, right? So point 1, we see through those 3 verses, right? We see how God instructs the treatment of slaves, right? Pay him on time, pay him what he's owed, don't oppress him, right? And include them in when you're rejoicing before the Lord, right? So we're treating our servants with kindness, protection, dignity, and we're not exploiting them, right? Now, point 2, right? The releasing of the slaves was a mandate, right? They work for you for 6 years. On that 7th year, you release them and you give them a portion of what God has blessed you with, right? Resources, food, drink, basically supplying. You're basically investing in their new start. And again, just imagine how this world would be if that was the case, right? Is when we abolished slavery, imagine what it would have been like if we're like, okay, we're going to free you guys. You are no longer slaves. And here's some land that we've taken from you guys. Here's some money from what we've taken from or kept from you guys, right? Here's some provisions, right? Here's maybe some education, right? Because we were barred from going to school from all that kind of stuff, right? So just again, just kind of just spitballing and throwing some things out there, but just imagine how much of the difference we would see in the world, how less hatred there would be in the world if we actually just paid attention to what God commanded and actually followed it. How much different the world would be today. All right, so those are our 2 points halfway through. Point 3, freed slaves were actually not, you were mandated not to return them. So if a freed man came upon you, you were not supposed to be like, oh no, you broke away, I'm gonna go send you back, right? And so we're gonna get into that real quick. So we see this in chapter 23, Deuteronomy. Chapter 23 of Deuteronomy. Where we at? Here's chapter 23. All right, cool. And we're going to go into verse 15. Miscellaneous laws. So again, these are actual laws. This would be like the government of America saying, hey, this is what this land is going to adhere by to, right? So it says, verse 15, you shall not give back to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you. 16. He may dwell with you in your midst in the place which he chooses within one of your gates, where it seems best to him. You shall not oppress him. Again, you shall not oppress him. So 15, 16, 15. You shall not give back to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you. So if you're walking down the street and you see some slave running by, you're not supposed to be like, hey, you broke away, you're going back, here we go. Instead, God says he can dwell with you in your midst. So he's going to live with you in your city, and he's not only is he going to live with you in your city, he's going to choose where he wants to live. So he's, again, you're not going to give him back. Instead, you're going to be like, hey, come stay in his city. And matter of fact, go ahead and let me know where you want to stay, right? And it says, within one of your gates where it seems best to him. So then he's going to decide, oh, okay, yeah, I think me and my family might actually like it over here. I'm going to kick it over here and stay over here for a while. Boom. And then it ends with, you shall not oppress him. So this is now the 3rd time in a separate section of Deuteronomy where we've seen God saying that you shall not oppress the slave. Why? Because God is very, he's actually very symbolic in the way that he speaks, is one thing that I personally noticed when I've experienced him. And because, like the Bible says, he does not change. He's not a God who changes. Because he doesn't change and he's very symbolic, a lot of what he does and requires, you'll see like the repeating theme, right? And so, again, in his mind and in actuality, right, the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt, right? And he redeemed them. He brought them out and put them into the promised land. So now we're called, because God never tells you to do something that he hasn't done first. That's like the biggest lesson that I've learned, is that he never calls you to do something that he hasn't done first, right? So And as me being in the military, that's actually something that we kind of say is like the mark of true leadership, right? If I have my airmen pulling 12s on the weekend, I shouldn't be at home with my family on the weekend, right? If I'm gonna have my airmen come in to work on the weekend and working a 12-hour shift, I should be there right there with them. You know what I mean? Getting my hands and knees dirty as well with them, right? A leader shouldn't ask you to do something that they're not willing to do, right? And so God is the perfect example of that. He says, because just like I called you out of bondage and delivered you into a place of freedom, and I treated you with kindness, you're now going to allow these people to escape their bondage, bring them into a place of freedom, and you're going to be called to treat them with kindness. So again, a leader, a great leader, hallmark of a great leader is that doesn't actually do anything that he's not willing to do first. So this is the third time we're foot stomping oppression. You are not to oppress the slave. So we've seen how God mandates to treat our slaves. We see that God calls us to release our slaves and don't let them go away empty-handed. And now we also see that if a slave was to escape, you're actually not supposed to return them. Instead, you make nice with them and you allow them to move into your city within your gates, as the Bible says, in a place that they choose, right? And it says you will not oppress him. So you'll just go about him treating him like he's any other citizen, right? Now the last point, or before I culminate this and put this all together, is slavery was also, at least when it was ordained by God, right? So obviously this wasn't the case with Pharaoh and the Egyptians, right? Because the children of Israel were treated inhumanely with them. But when slavery is being allowed by God, it's oftentimes as a punishment or a judgment because the children of Israel, or just people right now, followers, as the children of Israel began to expand in the 12 tribes and all that kind of stuff, right? So just it was a punishment or a judgment because of our failure to obey God. So oftentimes he would use, in the Bible it's going to say captivity, but oftentimes he would call, and he would have the prophets tell the children of Israel that like your time is coming because we're being disobedient. And a lot of times it was because of idolatry. And so that's what we're going to get into real quick is point 4, slavery as punishment or judgment by God. So for those of you guys who were just kind of joining in, point 1, we saw God's instructions on the treatment of slaves. Point 2, we saw that slaves are actually called to be released in the 7th year. Point 3, you're freed slaves. If you came across a freed slave, you were not to return them back to their master. They were instead called to stay with you in a place of their choosing, and you were not allowed to oppress them. And now we're on point 4, where slavery is seen as a punishment or a judgment due to disobedience. So we're going to go to 29. Or actually, let me go in order here. We were just in 23, so let me go to chapter 24, verse 7. 24, verse 7. There's 5. Boom. So it says, if a man is found kidnapping any of his brethren of the children of Israel, and mistreats him or sells him into slavery, then that kidnapper shall die. And you shall put away the evil from among you. So we're already seeing again that slavery is not something that God condones. And you should not, like let's say, honestly, Joseph probably would be the best example of this because Joseph's brothers actually sold him into slavery. There's a dream that Joseph had. And while Joseph didn't know what the dream meant, his brothers knew what it meant, and they got jealous and basically like same thing as in here. Basically, they just kidnapped him and sold him into slavery. He ends up obviously reigning, and the brothers actually end up meeting Joseph. Joseph obviously has a heart of forgiveness, and so the story ends on a good note. But had Joseph actually said like he wanted them to be put to death, Joseph, them being his brothers, Joseph actually would have been in the right because per the law, right, chapter 24, this section is called miscellaneous laws. It says if a man is found kidnapping any of his brethren of children of Israel and mistreats him or sells him, so even just being mean to them or selling them, then that kidnapper would be put to death. That kidnapper would die, and that death was so that way the evil that you did would be moved from among you. So already I kind of just want to highlight this, is that it says you shall put away the evil from among you. So just not only is kidnapping, right, considered evil, obviously selling him to slavery is evil, but it also says just mistreating him is considered evil. So again, just kind of like putting that into perspective of how God thinks. Even treating someone unkindly is considered evil, and that alone would have been cause for you to be put to death. Moving on though, I don't want to foot stomp that too much. Moving on, let's see what's the next chapter I got. We're in 24. We're going to go to 28. 28, 33 through 44. To 33. 33. Here we go. It says, "A nation whom you have not known shall eat the fruit of your land." So, this section, if you go back, so it's chapter 28, but at the start of verse 15, it actually says it's titled "Curses of Disobedience," curses on disobedience. So this is actually them now speaking from God, right? So they're saying like basically like this is what's gonna happen if you like I've given you up until this point he's given them all the laws of the land, and so now he's saying if you fail to do these laws, this is now what's gonna be happening as a punishment. And so in 33 we see again the point of punishment, punishment or judgment is what God, to make his point of cross of like, hey, you've been disobedient and I'm trying to get you back in line with me. We see him using slavery as a means to do that. And so 33, we're getting into it. It says, "A nation whom you have not known shall eat the fruit of your land and the produce of your labor, and you shall be only oppressed and crushed continually." Now beforehand we saw you're supposed to treat your slaves with kindness. You shall not oppress them. God is saying that now a foreign nation, right? So in today's sense, we're in America. This would be like saying Russia is now going to rise against us and they're going to profit off of our land and they're going to profit off of the work that we've done. And not only will you be oppressed by them, but you will be crushed continually. So your spirits, not only will they physically dominate us, but just internally, mentally, you will be crushed by them. 34. "So you shall be driven mad," you're going to go crazy, "because the sight of which your eyes see." So the things you see will cause you to go crazy. "The Lord will strike you in the knees and on the legs with severe boils which cannot be healed." You're going to get skin diseases. "And from the sole of your foot on top of your head." So he's basically just about to cover you with these severe boils, this skin disease. "The Lord will bring you and the king whom you set over you to a nation which neither your fathers nor your forefathers have known. You will serve other gods, wood and stone, and you shall become an astonishment." A proverb, a wise saying to like a warning, "and a byword among all nations where the Lord will drive you." So basically he's saying this punishment's going to be so bad that it like will be used as an example or as a warning for future generations. Like, hey, don't do that because you don't want to be like the Israelites where remember where such and such happened? Yeah, so you don't want to do this. That's basically what they're saying. 38. "You shall carry much seed out to the field, but gather little." So you're going to go look to gather like seeds, right? Food and stuff like that, but you're not going to gather much. "For the locust shall consume it. You shall plant vineyards and tend them, but you shall neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes." So you're going to be tending in this garden, but it won't be profitable. You're basically just going to be working your life away because it says that you won't gather any drink from the wine. Even though you're tending to it, you're doing what you're supposed to do, you're not going to gather any wine from it nor the grapes. Because why? Because the worms will eat them. So basically what we're seeing is you're not going to prosper. Someone else is going to come in and they're going to reap off of the hard work that you've been putting down. They're going to reap the benefits of that work. You will not prosper. You will work, but you will not prosper. And it says, "You shall have olive trees throughout all your territory, but you shall not anoint yourself with the oil, for your olive shall drop off." So again, nothing is sustaining. You're constantly working and toiling away, but nothing is working. Nothing is working. Nothing is working. And it says 41, You shall beget sons and daughters, but they shall not be yours, for they shall go into captivity. 41. So you are going to have children during this time period. So not only are you already going to be physically crushed, right, and being dominated by this foreign nation, you're going to have children in this time period, except they won't be yours because they're going to be sold off into slavery. They're going to go into captivity, it says. And it says, 42, locusts shall consume all your trees and the produce of your land. So your land is going to end up becoming barren. 43, pay attention to this. The alien who is among you, the foreigner, right? The person who does not belong. So at this point, it's the person who's not part of the children of Israel. So it says, the alien who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you. So they're elevating, they're prospering, they're going forth. And it says, you shall come down lower and lower, right? So they're ranking up, they're being elevated, and yet you're coming down lower and lower and lower. He shall lend to you, verse 44, he shall lend to you, but you shall not lend to him. He will be the head, and you will be the tail, meaning you'd be coming to him for help. If you could just loan me this, I'll be so grateful, right? So, we just read verses 38 to 44, right? And so what are we seeing? It all boils down to, because of the curses of disobedience, right? That's what this section is headlined. The curses of disobedience will bring about basically a nation that you've never known is basically about to come in, and not only are they going to dominate you, they're going to reap all the hard work that you've put down. So they're about to reap everything that you've sown, all the work and all of blood, sweat, and tears that you've been pouring in to see all this increase, to see things grow, to make this money, to sustain this life for you and your family. Now they're about to reap off of that. And it says you will have children, 41, but they won't be yours. And why won't they be yours? Because they're going to be going into captivity, which is slavery. So again, slavery is a punishment. It is not the way of the world. It is a punishment. And the reason why we see Moses bringing out the Israelites from slavery is because they were God's chosen people. So when you align yourself with God, he will bring you out of captivity. He will bring you out of slavery. He will bring you out of bondage, and he will call you into a place that's better, right? But the same way he treats you is how you're called to treat others. And failure to do that will cause what? For you to go right back into captivity. Why? Because you're not learning your lesson. You're being disobedient to God. You're putting forth evil where he's called freedom. You're putting forth bondage where he's called restoration, right? So again, God doesn't call you to do anything that he himself has not done already. He calls you to be kind because he was kind to us. He calls you to sacrifice because he's already paid the sacrifice, right? He gave his son on our behalf, right? For us to prosper. He's already prospering. He owns it all. He rules the universe, right? So he's calling us to a place of prosperity. And what are we doing? We're disobeying him, right? And so he says that, okay, this is how you guys are going to learn your lesson, right? Because there's something about being brought down low that makes you realize how good you got it, right? We hear that saying that you never know how good you got it until it's gone. There's something about humans, man. It's like until we come to like rock bottom, then we realize, man, I wouldn't mind staying in my parents' house and paying rent. Man, I wouldn't have mind staying in my buddy's apartment, even though it was gross. At least it was a place to live in. Right now, you're stuck on the street somewhere, right? You never know how good you got it until you're forced to live without it. And that's what God's basically doing with slavery. You don't realize how much being kind matters until you're forced when you're forced to work in a system that's unkind to you. Then you realize how much it matters being kind to someone, smiling to someone, helping someone out in their time of need, right? It's not until you hit rock bottom until you realize how much of those little things, right? Those things that don't cost us any money to do, right? Being kind is free. Then you start realizing how much more of an importance that is not only to you, right? How much nicer it would be for someone to treat you with kindness when you're down and out, but how much more it matters to God, right? Because we see here, because they're not doing it, now he's going to force them into doing it, right? When I call you into captivity, maybe then you'll learn your lesson, right? And so that's what basically happens. So that's what we're seeing in this section. So with these 4 points, like I said, point 1, God's instructions on how to treat slaves. We see that, they're in point 2 that they're actually called to be released. So they do their time for 6 years, they serve you, and then you release them in the 7th year, and you release them with a portion of the stuff that God's blessed you with, whether it's, resources, money, provisions, right? Supplies, food, drinks, stuff like that, right? Point 3, your freed slaves were not to be returned. Instead, they were going to, in a place in the place of their choosing, they were going to be called to stay with you and to dwell in your land. Slavery also was, it was a free will thing too, right? In that release of the slaves in chapter 15 of Deuteronomy, verses 12 through 18, it actually says that if you chose to release the slave and the slave was like, well, no, I actually want to stay with you because over here I was prospering, things were good, we were getting stuff done, you were paying me right, you were treating me with kindness, like I want to stay here. God actually gives them an instruction on what to do to make that your slave forever, right? So even with slavery, there was still free will attached. God is a God of free will. He doesn't force himself onto you. You have to choose him. And then point 4, we see slavery as a punishment. It's an act of judgment. So oftentimes with the children of Israel, pretty much the overarching overview of the Old Testament you'll see is that the children of Israel just continue to not obey God. They just kind of keep falling into this cycle. So Moses tells them, hey, these are the 10 commandments and these are the laws that you're going to do now that we're in our promised land. Well, Moses actually doesn't make it to the promised land. So he says, when you get to the promised land, these are the laws you're going to abide by, right? He dies. Joshua comes in and takes his place. Joshua starts conquering land. The promised land is now theirs. They're starting to expand. And then Joshua, before he dies, says, hey, these are the laws, right? Remember these laws that Moses said. Make sure you do them, or else these things will be added onto you as means of punishment. And what is that punishment? Slavery. So God just brought them out of captivity, and he says, if you don't follow these laws because they're holy and just and fair and peaceful, then I'm gonna do what? Put you right back into captivity. I'm gonna give you right back over to that. Why? Because maybe then you'll learn your lesson and you'll realize how good you had it and how peaceful and beautiful life was when you were listening to my instructions. Then I'll bring you right back out. And if you fail to do that again, I'll put you right back in. And so what happens? There's a period in the Bible where they fall so heavily and start doing some pretty crazy things that the Babylonians come in and capture them for a time period. There's the book of Lamentations. If you're just curious and want to see about how bad things have gotten, the book of Lamentations will definitely paint that picture for you. And again, we can't say it's not just because God told them. God said, these are my rules, and if you don't listen, then these things will come upon you. And they were like, okay, we will serve you, right? In the book of Joshua, he says, we will serve you. We have heard these instructions, and we choose to serve God. And so they signed up for it. God said, do these things. They said, okay, cool, we know God. We know he wants us to do these things, and if we don't do these things, then these things will happen as a result. And they still signed on the dotted line, and then what happened? They started doing the things that God said don't do, and so we see the punishment happen, right? And so I don't think it gets any just than that, right? A righteous God has to stand by his word. So if he says it's going to happen, then it's going to happen, because he is an all-powerful God. So my concluding point to drive all of this home is that we see in Deuteronomy that God actually outlaws oppression. And the reason why I chose Deuteronomy is because it's like a book of law almost. There's a lot of stuff that God has told Moses to tell them, like, this is how you're going to do this. This is how we're going to do that. And there's certain times to celebrate, and there's certain times to remember the things that I've done for you, all this kind of stuff, right? And so I say that as a point because similarly, if we were as a government, right, like if the government of America chose to keep God's mandates in mind, God's character in mind, when they formulated this country, how much different of a life we would have had, right? If you were treating your slaves, your servants with kindness, if you paid them what they were owed, right? If you remember to include them when you're out there like, man, today's a good day and you're rejoicing in the presence of the Lord, including your servants, right? How much more of a difference this world would be had we done those things. So again, not to go down another tangent, my concluding point is this: God outlaws oppression and he mandates love and kindness. Why? Because he's a peaceful God. We see in Matthew chapter 22 verses 39, Matthew 22 verse 39, it says, where Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Love your neighbor. And in Deuteronomy, we saw how it says, even the foreigner in your gates, right? The stranger, the alien in your gates, right? The freed slave was able to come into your gates in a place that he chose and would dwell there, right? So if Jesus is saying love your neighbor, so we're seeing it in the Old Testament that it's mandated, treat them with kindness. And now we're seeing in the New Testament, Jesus is saying, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Foreigners, family, loved ones, whatever, it doesn't matter. Treat them, love them the way you love yourself. So he outlaws oppression and instead mandates love. It's a requirement, not a suggestion. So, again, I hope that I've emphasized enough that God's heart is one of justice, it's one of kindness, and it's one of freedom and restoration. Okay, slavery was never the end game. The point was to bring people into a promised land. Okay, in the greater sense, it's called to bring us into heaven. Right? The problem is because we have free will to make our decisions, and God is a gentleman, he's not going to force himself on us. He allows us to make our own decisions, but he will give you over to your decision. So he says, if you don't want to treat your slaves with kindness, well, then you'll become the slave who's being treated unkindly. Right? And then maybe then when you learn your lesson, I'll pull you back out and we'll try this again. And then, what happens? The children of Israel fail to learn their lesson, and so he brings them back into captivity again. And it's just this over-ending cycle. And then what happens? We see Jesus the Messiah put an end to that completely. And into bondage, and into death, and into hell on earth. He puts an end to that, right? But you got to read your Bible to find out how that takes place. So, as a wrap-up, as a recap, I'm looking at my notes here to make sure I'm staying on topic. So, we see that God regulated the treatment of slaves, right? Dignity and kindness. We see that he mandated freedom, right? He built in a year of release, right? Year 7, you're supposed to release your slaves, and not only just release them, you gave them a portion of the stuff that God blessed you with. So they weren't supposed to go away empty-handed. Your runaways were actually protected. So God is a God of safety. Your runaways were protected. Slavery was used as judgment. It was not God's design. God is not a God of, superiority. God is actually a servant. We see that with Jesus. Jesus was called to serve, not to condemn, right? God is not a God of judgment. He's actually a God of peace, of prosperity, right? Of abundance, right? But we make some terrible decisions. We do not want to listen to God. We want to do what we want to do, and so we have to learn the hard way. And slavery was the hard way. It was not God's design. And then the overending point is Jesus' commandment to love your neighbor. Oppression is outlawed, okay? Oppression is outlawed, but it will be used if you fail to take heed to that of what God commands you. So there we have it. I feel like most people kind of stop at the whole God allows slavery, and then because of that they never look deeper. And so I hope that this breakdown opens your eyes to what the book of Deuteronomy really says, and share that with someone, right, who's ever wrestled with the question of, God can't be real, or he's not peaceful, or he can't be loving because he allowed slavery to exist, or slavery's in the Bible, right? Because now we know better, right? We know better now. So share this with them if they've answered that, if they've ever wrestled with that question. Like I said, it was something that I've kind of would use against people, right? So I feel like it's fairly common. So share this video. Maybe, you never know, it might start a conversation and kind of begin to change the way that they see God. I hope it changed the way you see God, right? And hopefully kind of get your gears turning on why the true reason why there's violence in the world, right? And since this is just one hard question about faith, I want you guys to tell me the toughest question you've ever wrestled with, right? In the comments. Go ahead and put those questions in the comments, because you never know, it might be the question that I actually addressed in my next video. So give me some food for thought, like and subscribe, share this with somebody, and let's change the way we view God, one question at a time, right? Because again, here in the den, this is where faith gets real. So go forth, may peace be with you. I pray to see you guys in the next video. Until next time, see you guys.